Good evening, friends. My name is Tress MacDonald, and I'm the Program Director at the Writers' Room of Boston. I'm thrilled that you can join us this evening for the first event in our virtual reading series, Readings from the Room. For over 30 years, the Writers' Room of Boston has provided an urban co-working space for established and emerging writers in the greater Boston area. We launched this new reading series as a way to share the amazing literary talents of the writers who have called this community home. We kick off our series tonight with two fabulous writers, Alex Marzano-Lesnevich and Lisa Braxton. Both Alex and Lisa will share a reading from their work, and then we'll open it up to a larger discussion for some time for questions and answers at the end. As we go along, please feel free to interact by using the comments features. We just ask that you stay on your best behavior, and there is a box for you to type your questions so that we can delve into them after the readings. Readings from the Room is made possible in part by the Mass Cultural Council and the Boston Cultural Council, but we also rely on friends. If you enjoy this program, please consider making a contribution using the donate button at the bottom of the screen. And lastly, we will be recording this reading, and a replay will be available later on our website. So let's begin with Alex. Alex Marzano-Lesnevich is the author of The Fact of a Body, A Murder and a Memoir, named one of the best books of the year by the likes of Entertainment Weekly, Audible.com, Bustle, Book Riot, The Times of London, The Guardian, and Paris Match, as well as a finalist for a New England Book Award and a Goodreads Choice Award, and has been translated into 10 languages. Alex is the recipient of fellowships from the National Endowment for the Arts, MacDowell, Gatto, and the Bread Loaf Writers Conference, and the Maine Arts Commission, as well as a Rana Jaffe Award. Alex has written for the New York Times, the New York Times Sunday Magazine, the Boston Globe, Oxford American, Harper's, and many others. A former member of the Writers' Room of Boston, Alex joins us from Maine. Welcome, Alex.
Thank you, Trez. And I should say my pronouns are they, them for those in the group. So they will be reading something new. Specifically, they will be reading something just written and finished in the pandemic. It is great to be reading in support of the room. I wrote most of my first book there, The Fact of a Body, particularly if you remember the layout. I know it may have been a while since we've all been in it. Though I'm thrilled it's reopened. If you walk into the room, the cubicle immediately on your right, I wrote most of The Fact of a Body in that cubicle. So thanks so much for having me, and it's great to be reading alongside Lisa. I am going to be reading from a piece that will be out in Harvard Review next month. It is in 50 short sections. They're numbered. You'll hear me read the number at the start. Obviously, I'm not going to read 50 short sections. I'm going to read just a couple of them, but you'll get a sense for where it's going. And I decided to read it in the spirit of what we all do in the room, which is make new work, because I started writing this very early in the pandemic. Kind of wasn't sure what it was about quite, and then finished it January 2nd. Finally kind of clicked into place. But it won't click into place yet because I'm only going to read the first few, but let's get started. It's called Futurity. 1. On a morning early in the second month of the unprecedented time, I rise to the sound of the birds and pad to the kitchen in my slippers. The air smells of hot coffee. Snow blankets the roof just outside the window, the light glinting off it, tracing swirls on the wall. I pour the coffee, roasty, familiar, constant. A few weeks ago, I would have carried the cup to my writing desk. There, said a short prayer to the God of creation, pressed my pen to the page, and tried to listen. But now I carry it back to my bedroom, where the curtains remain closed. I turn my bedside lamp on and open the novel on my nightstand. I will be in its world, not this one. 2. My jawline has become covered in blonde fuzz, and later, in front of the bathroom mirror, I see it backlit, the fuzz so pale it is visible only when struck by this light. I turn my head this way, then that, looking. The fuzz wasn't there a month ago. So much has changed. When my agent sent me notes on the latest writing I've been doing, he included an instruction that I must search for mentions of my jawline. You mention the fuzz here and here and here, he says. He means we get the point. He means the mentions are getting old. But I've lived all my decades with a smooth jawline. To me, none of this is old. I think of change constantly and the way change implies progression. And now, looking left and looking right, I wonder what I am seeing, what the fuzz is a harbinger of. Will it grow longer? Will I grow a beard? Or will it stay like this, so pale as to be nearly invisible, prepubescent even as time goes forward and inscribes lines on my skin? The future is as unknown to me as the changed world outside my window, the present like a scratch in one of the records my father used to play. 3. At the start of the shelter orders, a lover texted me that fuck it. While we are all staying at home, they will grow in their soul patch. Shortly after we first met and I told them I was on testosterone, they looked at me in envy. I can't. My levels are already so high. I'll look too much like a man, they said. I'm like you. I don't want to pass. But your body takes its time. You get to choose where you land. 4. This lover will come back up, so let's give them a name. Let's call them D. 5. When I wrote that I just met D, what I meant was that we had recognized something in each other on a dance floor. The floor almost empty, the music so loud as to hold all the space of this place, and our bodies had begun a silent communication, me moving this way and that, them coming closer and then moving further away. This was still, of course, in the before time. Disco lights looped the floor, some colored in ice blue. The beams cast like shadows had been shaped into snowflakes. Watching the swoop of the carved light, I imagined the sheets of colored polyethylene that had made it, that cool blue pressed to a burn like fire. The lights chased us, and the music grew louder still, and I had grimaced or Dee had grimaced. They said something, but I didn't hear. I shook my head, and they came in close, their mouth suddenly fitted over the shell of my ear. Want to find some quiet? I felt the sound lap in my ear canal, warm. Then the cold slap of outside, the sudden grace of dark, the stars above us so still. They pulled from their pocket a key. The key fitted the lock of their office, which turned out to be across the street. They knew where the security cameras were, the unlocked closet. Afterward, the two of us, a little punchy, maybe with drink and maybe with flush, we laughed at the irony of finding ourselves in a closet. We who have located whole lives, whole selves, in the stepping out of closets. There was a small red light like in a dark room, and I remember using its dimness as cover to look at them, to really look. The hair, dark enough to be inky, clipped short as bristles. The jaw, square yet soft. Their shoulders, their breasts. They watched me look, the white of their eyes pink in the light, the mirrored black centers. Beads of sweat had formed on their upper lip. Tufts of hair greeted me from their armpits. Their sports bra, 2 sizes too small, had left angry, raw marks across their soft chest. I looked at the hair under their arms and the scores left by the flattening, and they looked at me, and I knew what they were seeing in me, too. Silence stretched into something sinewy enough to hold us. For the first time, I thought how alike were the words wrapped, R-A-P-T, and wrapped, W-R-A-P-P-E-D. When they spoke, their voice scratched the edge of tears. I didn't know it would be so healing, they said. I've never been with someone else who... I don't think I let them finish. My mouth over theirs. 6. An incomplete list of things I have heard called queer about the pandemic. The surge in people making their own sourdough starter of nothing more than flour and water and time. The rise in mask for mask jokes. Or, what does a lesbian bring to a second date? No, not a U-Haul, a COVID test. Or, U-Hauling as a responsible public health move. Cuffing season, sex pods. The New York City Public Health Department recommending people, quote, make it a little kinky with glory holes. The rise in OnlyFans and Findom, which is to say, the rise in sex work. Thirst traps, sexting, phone sex, Zoom sex, FaceTime sex, sleeping with your roommates, spending the holidays with chosen family. The very fact of a pandemic. Loss, grief, the impossibility of imagining a future. 7. Futurity, noun. Yes, all right, future time, the sense that there will be a future. The very thing we are all trying to hold on to as we wait for it to arrive. The projected shape that future makes. The shadow or light it casts over the present. But also futurity, noun, a race for 2-year-old horses, into which they are entered before they are born. 8. And okay, as a metaphor for gender, maybe that's a little obvious. But also, futurities offer some of the richest prizes in horse racing. 9. From the windows of my study, I can see the largest hospital in Maine. By law, the ambulances must turn off their sirens this close, and so periodically when I look up from my desk now, 2 months into the at-home time, I see silent flashing lights. After a few days of this constant screaming, silent alarm, and of the helicopters that land on the hospital roof at all hours, their thrum so loud as to consume me in the beat of metal wings, I write a prayer with a blue Sharpie onto a purple index card and thumbtack it to the wall between the 2 windows, right in my line of sight. May they be safe. May they be happy. May they be healthy. May they live with ease. 10. When we learn that men are dying at an exponentially higher rate than women from this virus, a friend asked me if I'll keep taking testosterone. I mutter something about how, well, I'm not going to go off a drug without medical advice, and my doctor has other things on her mind right now. But that answer I know is bullshit. One of the purported benefits of the daily gel I use versus a weekly shot is that its progress is slow, and each day I must choose to apply it, must reaffirm my choice of who I am transforming so to visibly be. I could choose no. What I really mean, but don't say, is that men have shorter life expectancies, more heart attacks, higher rates of dementia, and that I already knew all that. The trade-off did occur to me, but I do ask the doctor if I will lose my hair. That's what Rogaine's for, she says. It's not a reason not to live your life. Obviously, I want to live my life. I just like to live it with hair. 11. Here is how, researchers say, we slot one another into genders with a glance. The shape of the hairline, the shape of the eye socket, the ratio of hip to waist, the shape of the jawline, the shape of the chest. Clothing, hair length, manner of standing, where fat is distributed, quickness to smile. You can tell by the nose, the title of a 1995 study. We look for patterns. We look for what we know how to see. And all right, I get that with the bodily factors, I'm talking about sex, not gender. But what I'm really speaking of is how people perceive, the slotting, the conflation that happens the instant they perceive. That instant is what I keep thinking about. Just an instant, but in it, a whole narrative, and my life unfurls. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really enjoyed that passage. And it's great to see you being productive during the shutdown, because I know personally I haven't been. But as always, your prose is really poignant and meditative and practical in so many wonderful ways. So thank you so much. Our next reader this evening is Lisa Braxton. Lisa is an Emmy-nominated former television journalist, an essayist, short story writer, and novelist. Her first novel, The Talking Drum, recently was selected by Shelf-Bound Book Review magazine as the overall winner of its 2020 Independently Published Book Award. Lisa also received the 2020 Outstanding Literary Award from the National Association of Black Journalists. Her stories and essays have appeared in Vermont Literary Review, Black Lives Have Always Mattered, Chicken Soup for the Soul, and the Book of Hope. Lisa is joining us from Boston today, and I'll let you take it away. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Trez. It's very good to be here this evening. And as you mentioned, I'm reading from The Talking Drum, which is about 3 young couples and how they are affected when an urban redevelopment project takes over a neighborhood. So I'm going to be reading from chapter 3, which introduces two of my characters, Omar and Natalie. They are a young couple. They've not been married very long, and they're having lots of marital problems. And the urban redevelopment and plan for gentrification is a big factor in their marital issues. Omar Basari read the notice that his wife Natalie held inches from his nose. The Basaris had to pay 3 months back rent by the end of the month, including late fees, or be evicted. "El es un idiot," Omar muttered as he returned his attention to the peanut paste he had cooking on the stove. "Fullerton does not care a fig about us." Natalie flung the notice along with the rest of the day's mail and her canvas book bag onto the kitchen counter. An accounting textbook, the Bellport Gazette, and some sheet music slid out. She pulled at the sleeves of her goose-down jacket and hung it on a hook in the hallway. "I knew a rent strike was a bad idea," she fumed. "Why did you listen to those people?" The Basaris rented a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in the Commonwealth Arms, a pre-World War I building on King Street in the heart of Petite Africa, owned by white businessman James Fullerton. They'd moved there 6 months ago when a fire burned down their 3-story rooming house. Omar's uncle Mustafa had found them their first apartment a year and a half ago when the couple moved to town after they both dropped out of Howard University in Washington, D.C. After the fire, Mustafa stepped in again, negotiating a reduced price from Fullerton for the couple to live at the Commonwealth Arms. This allowed Omar to cover most of the household expenses with the $30 to $40 a week he averaged from his drumming performances. Natalie was studying to be an accountant, but dreamed of acting in theater and film. She had white classmates at Bellport College who got experience and extra money doing bit parts in TV commercials. But casting companies rarely chose Black performers, so she settled for jobs doing voiceovers and jingles for radio. She barely made enough to pay for her college courses and private voice and acting lessons. Not much was left over for anything else. The Commonwealth Arms was in worse shape than the other building they lived in. The plumbing backed up. The oil heat worked off and on. To Omar, the building's problems were minor inconveniences. Growing up in West Africa, he knew nothing of utilities, landlords, rent, or groceries. He spent his childhood in the family care, a compound of mud huts with thatched roofs. There was no plumbing, running water, or electricity. Pit toilets were kept at the far end of the care. At sundown, villagers lit paraffin lamps or candles or sat in the dark and told fables. Once, Omar got workers to fix the boiler, but within days it broke down again. He went into Liberty Hill and bought fan heaters for the apartment. Natalie had to heat water on the electric stove for bath water. She complained that they weren't living much better than the villagers from his community. Then one night, the elevator broke. Tenants got stuck between floors for hours. Natalie was forced to haul her books and groceries up 6 flights. All the tenants were fed up with the conditions. One night, they met in the stairwell to vent about the building's problems. They decided on a rent strike. They would not pay Fullerton until repairs were made. Natalie saw the strike as a waste of time. She thought there was no way that Fullerton would budge and that she and Omar should simply pack up and move. Declaring, "The jungle is stronger than the elephant," Omar overruled his wife. Today, all the tenants found eviction notices taped to their doors. On the stove, the peanut paste was beginning to bubble. The long-handled wooden spoon, Omar scooped up the paste and folded it in with the beef cubes, broth, and tomato paste warming in another pot. Normally, Natalie wouldn't be home in time for dinner, but her appointment with the voice coach had been canceled. To mark the occasion, Omar used some of the tip money from his drum performances and went to Bamba's Africa food market down the street to get the ingredients for mafe, or groundnut stew, one of the few dishes from his country that Natalie would eat. Being an American, the food was unfamiliar to her. Bamba Tuku was out of goat meat, so Omar was using beef. He ordered half the amount the dish called for so he could also buy a jar of herbs he needed. "We shall not let this man chase us from this building," Omar declared. "We have the right to be here and to have good services. He cannot possibly put all of us out on the road." Natalie glared at him. "The man has no heart. What does he care?" She lifted the cover and peeked inside the pot, sniffed at the contents, and warmed her nose over the rising steam. Then she whipped around and marched down the hall toward the bedroom. The cowrie shells woven into her braids made light clicking sounds as they bounced against each other. Omar was glad to have her home. Since the fire, she had scheduled more classes, more coaching, and voiceover jobs. He had gotten into the habit of leaving a plate in the oven at night for her. She came to bed when he was asleep and left in the morning before he was awake. She claimed that she was trying to make up for the credit she lost when she dropped out of Howard, but he wondered if she was telling the truth. She never talked about the miscarriage. It had happened a few days after the fire. They had few conversations about anything since then, and they no longer touched each other in bed. But tonight would be different if his plan worked. And I would like to mention that I'm enjoying being a new member on the board of the Writers' Room of Boston. And I'm just so excited to be part of the board, looking forward to all of the events that we are planning.
Thank you, Lisa. That was great. Yay! So thankful that you and Alex have been able to share with us some of your work this evening. As we kind of pop Alex back on the screen, because we have some good questions that have arisen, I just wanted to kind of set the stage on please ask questions in the question button. That's how we see the questions as they come up for discussion today. So one of the questions that came through is a question for both you, Alex, and Lisa. People are wondering how your writing habits have changed this year. If you've adapted any new habits, or if you'll that you've adopted and will take with you as you reemerge from quarantine.
Well, I would like to say that I was actually much more productive with my writing when things were normal. I was working full time and I had little time for my writing. So because I had little time for it, I made the best of the time that I could find to work on my writing. And so now that I'm home and I don't feel the pressure, it's harder to get motivated. Also, the libraries are not open. And I did a lot of my writing in the library. So for me, I'm looking forward to getting back to my old routine of having little time, lots of pressure, which got me to really get motivated in my writing.
And I you guys hear me?
Yeah. There's a little
yeah, let me see if
good old Bluetooth technology.
I'm not quite sure what's going on. Is that better?
Yes, much.
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So in my case, I think I've been even more feast or famine than usual. I find teaching online to be quite draining. It's just a lot of hours of staring at a Zoom screen. And yet I did write the proposal for my next book, which is called Both and Neither. It'll be out from Doubleday in 2023. I did write that during the pandemic, and I found that what I had to do was just like drop everything and write, and was fortunate to be able to do that for stretches of time. I would say it's maybe not my writing pattern that has so much changed. My schedule is so weird anyway, so much as my reading pattern. A wonderful Boston writer and member of my beloved writing group, the Chunky Monkeys, the Boston writer is Chris Castellani. I'm sure many of you know him. He had mentioned to me very early in the pandemic that what he was doing was starting each day with 2 chapters of Middlemarch. And I was just like desperate for patterning. And so I decided to adopt that. And I started with Middlemarch and have just kept up this pattern of, you know, first thing in the morning before anything else, 2 chapters of some old novel that isn't this world. And it's been lovely. I've got to say, it's been lovely, and it helps the words flow. And it's such a treat, and I'm hoping that I carry that with me. It's a bit hard schedule-wise, you know. It's possible because of the lack of a commute, but it's quite nice. And maybe just getting up ever increasingly earlier is the answer. But it makes me feel like there's a world away from this one.
No, I think that's true of what we gain rather than what we lost during this year. Because I think we've all gained things. It's just in hindsight, we have to discover them. So I'm curious about both of your approaches to research. I know for your debut, both of your debut novels center around research. And I just was hoping you had any learnings of kind of how you take that and make it interesting rather than it seem like a book report in the final version. Lisa, do you have any comments about how you went about researching 1970s for gentrification?
Well, part of my research was living my life. I was a child at the time, but I watched my parents, who opened up a clothing store in 1969 in my hometown, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and watched them operate this business. The business was thriving initially, but after some time, the customer base began to dwindle, and part of it was because the customer base, part of it was the working class families who lived near the waterfront, and the homes along the waterfront were eventually taken for gentrification. So I watched how my parents' business suffered as a result of that. And then also, I just dug deep into quite a bit of research. In fact, I had a stack of books this high that I'd read to get a sense of what happened to people during that era. And I was digging around and actually found a couple of them in my bookcase, house by house, block by block, the rebirth of America's urban neighborhoods. And another one, building a new Boston, politics and urban renewal, 1950 to 1970. And you can probably see all of my post-its and then all of my highlights in this book. But what also helped was I didn't know how to write a novel, so I went back to graduate school for an MFA in creative writing. And my professors helped with that, how to take these stories and make them real. You have these situations that happen to people, and you take and you create characters, and you have the characters go through these situations. And I would say just taking classes in creative writing helped a lot, and just doing a whole lot of research and seeing mom and dad operate their business and listen to their conversations.
Great.
So for me, this is a very, it's doing it again. I don't know why. For me, it's a timely question because one of the classes I teach this term is called The Art of Creative Research, and I just taught it today. So for The Fact of a Body, I drew on 30,000 pages of court records, and I just spent years immersed in them. And I think what has to happen is that you have to become so familiar with the research that it takes on the quality of your own imagination. It becomes imbued with life in that way. And The Fact of a Body isn't a novel, it's nonfiction. But the scenes are recreated. In fact, I'm so curious, it's becoming a series at HBO. And so the director and I have had many chats lately about sort of how he's reimagining these scenes that I reimagined from the records and what I can get him from the records. The one for both and neither, the time span of the book is just vast. It covers several hundreds of years. The research takes place on a number of continents. I'll be at archives in England and in France next year, and Albania, and I'll just be all over the place. I'll be in Germany. And so how the heck I'm going to synthesize all of that in 1 year and make up the characters, I don't know. But I love it because what I love about it is that you can just sort of spend so much time with these things. You learn about the past and experience the resonances that it creates to the present and allow yourself to do that imaginative daydreaming. So a couple of quick resources if folks are curious what I draw on. I really love the defamiliarization chapter in Charles Baxter's Burning Down the House. Mm-hmm. It's a great craft lecture on how to think about paying attention to the stray details that come up in research. And I really, really love Philip Gerard's idea of the 7 kinds of creative archives, which is both in his craft books and is also in craft essays he's written for the Writer's Chronicle, that really pushed me to think beyond how I think of an archive. And to include imagination and memory into a list of archives, but then also to really think about the detritus of history as constituting its own form of archive.
No, I'm encouraged because sometimes you get weighed down on not being able to imagine. You get stuck on trying to be so exacting about the history and respecting time that sometimes as writers we forget that we can break that construct. So it's nice to hear both of your perspectives. Well, it seems like we're kind of at the end of our event. So I wanted to ask one final question before we wrapped it up. And it's really kind of basic, but I was just wondering, what is your favorite writing space, Alex?
I'm actually in it right now. It's a studio room in my apartment. I have like a railroad style apartment, and it's just a room that I have an armchair set up for reading behind me, that red thing. But these big bay windows you can't see in front of me that look out over the water in Maine. And so it has become my home, is my favorite writing space, which is new because it was always the room. But then I moved away from Boston and I had to find a new place to write. So it's here. Great.
And for you, Lisa?
Well, my favorite place is very, very humble and simple. It is my bed. I love to sit on my side of the bed with the legal pad, and I write in longhand. I write chapters in longhand, and then I massage them and go over them, and then I write on my laptop. And as I'm writing on my laptop, I'm actually rewriting on the laptop. I love to sit on my bed, and that's where I read, that's where I write, and that's my special place.
Nice. Well, I want to thank you, Alex and Lisa, for these amazing readings, and I want to thank all of our viewers for tuning in. Our next readings from the room is going to take place in May, so stay tuned. Otherwise, that concludes our program this evening. Until we meet again, be well and stay safe. I'm Tress McDonald, signing off from the Writers' Room in Boston. Good night, everybody.
Night.
Good night, everyone.